It was a dark and stormy night when Amir found himself lost in the middle of the forest. The trees around him stood like silent sentinels, casting long shadows that made it difficult to see. The wind howled through the branches, sending a chill down his spine. His car had broken down hours ago, and he had walked for what seemed like miles in search of a signal or some form of help, but to no avail. The forest seemed endless, and he was beginning to lose hope. As he trudged along the narrow, winding path, his mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong. What if I'm stuck here forever, he thought. He had been driving back from a late-night party with friends when his car's fuel ran out. The road he had been on was isolated, far from civilization. The eerie silence around him only made him feel more vulnerable. Suddenly, through the trees, he noticed a flickering light in the distance. It was faint, but it was there. Amir's heart skipped a beat. A light meant there could be a house or some sort of shelter nearby. He quickened his pace, feeling a glimmer of hope. As he got closer, the light grew brighter, and soon he stood before an old, decaying mansion. The mansion looked abandoned. Its walls were cracked and weathered, the windows broken, and a large rusted chain hung loosely from the door. The place seemed like it hadn't been inhabited for years. But despite the obvious signs of neglect, the light inside flickered, casting an eerie glow onto the overgrown lawn. Amir stood frozen for a moment, unsure of whether to enter. The light beckoned him, but something deep within his gut told him not to go inside. His instincts screamed for him to turn around and leave, but the growing sense of desperation overpowered his fear. He needed help. He slowly approached the door, and with a push, it creaked open. A musty odor hit his nose, and dust filled the air. He stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him with a force that made him jump. The sudden noise made his heart race. He turned round, but there was no sign of anyone. His breath quickened, and he felt a strange unease settle in the pit of his stomach. That the inside of the house was just as eerie as the outside. The wooden floors were covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling. Old portraits lined the walls, their faces obscured by the dirt and grime. Yet, in the center of the room, an ornate chandelier hung from the ceiling, its dim light flickering sporadically. It was as if the house was alive in its own twisted way. Amir cautiously walked further into the house, every creak of the floor beneath his feet echoing through the stillness. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of life, but all he saw was the decaying structure and the light that seemed to draw him in deeper. He was about to turn back when he heard something and eerie sound coming from upstairs. It was faint at first, like a low whisper or murmur. Then it grew louder, more distinct, until it became a chilling voice. The words were incomprehensible, but there was no mistaking the sense of dread that filled the air. Amir felt his heart hammering in his chest. He took a hesitant step toward the stairs, drawn by the voice, unsure of what awaited him. With each step, the whispering grew louder, as if the house itself was calling to him. He reached the top of the stairs and walked down a long corridor. The door at the end of the hallway was ajar, and the faint light emanated from within as he approached the door. The temperature seemed to drop, and a cold breeze swept through the corridor. Amir hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his mind raced with thoughts of what could be behind that door. He turned the knob and pushed the door open. Inside the room stood a large antique chair, and sitting in it was a figure. The person was completely still, their back to him. Amir felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the figure. There was something about the stillness that unsettled him, as if the figure was waiting for him, knowing he would come. The figure turned slowly, its face emerging from the shadows. Amir's blood ran cold. It was a woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were an unnatural shade of red. Her hair was long and wild, cascading down her back like a black waterfall. But what truly terrified Amir were her teeth, long, sharp, and stained with blood. "Who are you?" Amir whispered, his voice barely audible as fear gripped him. The woman smiled, a sinister grin that sent a chill down his spine. "I am something you cannot understand," she said in a voice that was both soft and menacing. "Something that has existed for centuries." Amir took a step back, his heart racing. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman's smile widened, and she stood from the chair. "I want nothing from